Thief. Julian Price said the word loudly enough for the whole parlor to hear, and every head turned toward Eliza Marsh. She measured his laudanum herself. Who's to say what she poured away? The solicitor cleared his throat, but no one spoke up for her. 2 days earlier, Eliza had watched Aldous Rennick die peacefully, holding the hand she had bathed and bandaged for 11 months. Now his nephew wanted her charged before the ink on the death certificate dried. If she said nothing, the accusation would follow her into every sick room in Yorkshire for the rest of her life. Then the solicitor read the final line of the will, and the parlor went quiet for a different reason. Aldous had left her Harrowgate Hall, the mortgaged, half-collapsed house nobody in the family would touch. Price laughed first. Eliza did not. She had nursed Aldous long enough to know he never wasted a word, and he had never once mentioned owning a second house. 3 days later, standing in the hall's cold stillroom, she found a door hinge mounted backward, swinging into a wall that should not have been warm. Whatever Aldous Rennick had hidden here, he had wanted someone patient enough to find it. Back in the parlor, nothing was settled. Mr. Deacon read the clause again, as though repetition might make it respectable. Harrowgate Hall, parish of Ossenthwaite, North Riding. 41 acres of moor edge and sour pasture. Subject to a mortgage of £380 and 4 years of arrears on the land tax. He has left her a debt and called it a legacy, Price said. My uncle enjoyed a joke to the last. Eliza kept her hands folded. 11 months in that house had taught her what came of answering too quickly. The bequest is unconditional, Deacon said. House, land, and contents. Contents. Price turned the word over. Is there a chair left in it? I am not obliged to know, sir. Mrs. Holloway, his married cousin, spoke from the window seat without turning around. One does hear how these things happen. An old man, a young woman, a quiet room. I was 41 in March, Eliza said. It came out flatter than she meant. Someone behind her laughed, then thought better of it. Price came to the table. He was a tidy man of 35 who had visited his uncle 4 times in 11 months, never for half an hour. Miss Marsh, let us be practical. You measured his medicine, every dose. And I wrote every dose down. She set the casebook on the table between them. Marbled boards, her father's stationer's stamp still legible inside the cover. She had kept books like it since she was 15, on a stool in his Wakefield shop, learning to weigh to the half-grain. An apothecary who guesses, he used to say, kills somebody eventually. Dates, hours, quantities, she said. Dr. Fuston countersigned every Friday. He keeps his own copy. Deacon reached for it. Price got there first, turned 3 pages, and set it down without reading a line. Anyone can keep a book, he said. Yes. Not everyone does. Deacon uncapped the pen. 2 papers lay on the table, and Eliza had read the second upside down while the will was still being read. A renunciation, Price said, pleasant again. Sign it and the family will see you right. £30 and a character from Mrs. Holloway. You'd have a place by Whitsun. And if I keep the house? Then the estate has discharged its obligation to you in full. He said it to Deacon, not to her. The bequest stands in place of wages. That is the effect, is it not? Deacon looked unhappy. It is arguable. It is the effect, Price said. £22. She had counted that sum too often in the hours between doses, beside a man who could no longer hold a cup. A year's lodging. A start somewhere nobody had heard the word thief said over her. She thought instead of an evening 10 days before the end, Aldous had sent her for the atlas, made her find a place in the North Riding, and held his thumb on it a long while. Say it back to me, he had said. Ossenthwaite. Again, he never told her why. Twice in 11 months he had asked about her father's shop, and both times he wanted the still room at the back. The copper, the drying racks, how long the herbs hung. She had taken it for conversation. Miss Marsh, Deacon said. The pen. She signed the acceptance and left the renunciation lying where it was. Price's face barely altered. That was what she remembered afterward, on the coach and long after. Ossenthwaite is 11 miles from a station, he said, drawing on his gloves. The roof went in 3 winters back. Nobody has slept there since my grandmother died in '51. He took up his hat. Keep the key, Miss Marsh. I shall have it off you by Michaelmas, and for a good deal less than £30. The key came in a tin box with a paper label in Aldous's own hand. Harrowgate, south door. It was iron, 7 inches long and heavier than anything else she owned. She left Leeds on the Tuesday with £4 18 a basket, and her father's brass scales wrapped in a shawl. The train got her to Thirsk by noon. The carrier's cart took the rest of the day. Harrowgate, said the carrier when she named it. He was a broad man of 60 with a bad ear, and he turned his head to bring the good one round. Harrowgate Hall? Yes. There's nobody there. There is now. He clicked at the horse and said nothing for 2 miles. The road climbed out of the good land into rough pasture, walls of dry stone running up the fell on both sides. Curlews went up out of the heather as they passed. You'll be the nurse then, he said at last. She had not told him that. Wilf Ackroyd, he added, as if it settled the account between them. Word came up Saturday. My sister's girl is in service at Deacon's. Then you know more than I do. I know the hall took our water, he said. He explained it flatly, the way a man explains a thing too often explained. A conduit had once brought water down from a spring on the hall's ground to a trough in the village street. When the house was shut up, the pipes failed. Nobody would pay to open them, and Ossenthwaite had carried its water up from the beck for 22 years. Becks low in August and foul in March, Ackroyd said. We buried 4 bairns in '69. Eliza looked at the road. Who owned the spring? Rennick's. Same as owned everything and mended nothing. The fleece stood at the crossroads with its door propped open. Mrs. Tyndall came out to look at the cart and did not offer a room. We've no bed made up, she said. I only want to know the way up to the house. You'll not miss it. Mrs. Tyndall folded her arms. Are you buying it or selling it? Neither. I own it. 3 women had come out of the next doorway. One of them laughed, and it was not a friendly sound. Well, said Mrs. Tyndall, then you'll want a roofer, a mason, and better luck than we've had. The avenue was half a mile of ash trees, and the ruts under them held standing water. Eliza saw the house first through the trunks. The south range had lost its roof entirely. 2 gables stood up out of the wreck with sky between them. The windows were empty of glass, and 100 jackdaws lifted off the stonework as she came up the drive. She stopped at the edge of the gravel and made herself count. 6 chimney stacks. She counted them twice, moving along the front to be certain of the far one, and she fixed their places against the gables so she would remember. The south door took the key without much argument. Inside, the first 3 rooms were floored with fallen plaster and birdlime. One ceiling had come down whole and lay across the passage like a drop table. Water stood in the hollows of the flags. She could smell wet lath and something older underneath it. The service range at the back was better. The slates there were mostly on and the kitchen was dry enough to stand in. There was a bread oven, and a range so rusted she doubted she could light it before Thursday. That was the whole of the survival problem, and she set it out plainly to herself while there was still light. 1 dry room, a fire, water she could carry, bread for 8 days at most, and no coal. She got a small fire going in the kitchen grate with laths and a broken drawer, boiled a pan of rainwater, and ate the last of the bread from her basket standing up. Then she took the candle down the back passage, because she had not yet seen every room, and she did not like owing a house any corners. The last door on the left opened on a stillroom. She knew it at once. A copper set in brickwork, a stone sink, 3 walls of shelving cut for jars, and the ghost of a herb rack still pegged to the ceiling. Her father's room, 20 years older and 40 miles north. The cupboard was on the 4th wall, and the cupboard was wrong. Its hinges had been mounted on the outer face. The door did not swing into the room like every other door in the house. It swung outward, flat against the wall, and whoever hung it had gone to trouble to make it do so. Eliza put her hand on the plaster beside it. The kitchen had been cold. The passage had been colder. This wall was warm. She set the candle down on the sink and watched the flame lean. She opened the cupboard that night, because she would not have slept otherwise. There was nothing in it but 4 shelves and a smell of old cork. She held the candle close and went along the backboards with her knuckles, and the sound changed on the 3rd shelf, brick behind the others. Something hollow behind that one. She stood a long while with her hand flat on the board. Then she shut the cupboard, because she had 8 days of bread, no coal, and a hole in a roof that would not wait for her curiosity. In the morning she wrote the house down. She used the back leaves of the casebook, since paper cost money. She set the work out the way her father set out a prescription, what must be done, in what order, and what would follow if it were not. South range. Gone. Leave it. East wing. Slates lifting. 4 rafters rotten. 6 months and £40 at least. Service range. Sound but for the scullery gutter. 2 days and the price of lead. Water. Carry from the beck until the spring is found. £40. She had £4 16 shillings and a pair of brass scales. She walked down to Ossenthwaite at 9 to buy bread and coal, and to learn what a woman with no character could buy on credit, which she suspected was nothing. She was still at the shop counter with her basket when the shouting started. A length of wall had come down where 2 men were rebuilding it opposite the smithy. One of them was on his knees in the road with his forearm laid open from wrist to elbow, and the blood was coming faster than the man beside him could press it back. "Bedale," somebody was saying. "Send for Bedale." "Bedale's 11 miles, Eliza said. "He'll be white before the horse is saddled." She was already down beside him. She got her thumb into the soft place above the elbow, and the bleeding slowed at once, and the man beside her stopped pushing and stared at her hand. "Hold there. Exactly there. Don't move it when he shouts. Who are you? Press harder." She sent the shop boy for boiled water and clean linen, and would not take the cloth the smith offered her, because it had been on a bench under a horse. "Missus." Tyndall brought a kettle out of the fleece and set it down without being asked twice. The arm took 40 minutes. Eliza washed it out 3 times, picked 2 chips of stone from the muscle, and closed it with 11 stitches of waxed thread from her own case. The man swore steadily. She let him. "Your name," she said when she tied off the last. "Job Hesketh." "Mr. Hesketh, you'll come up to the hall every morning for a week and I'll dress it. If it goes red past the elbow before then, you come the same hour, day or night. Up to the hall. Unless you'd rather send for Bedale." Somebody laughed. It was a different sound from the day before. Wilf Ackroyd had come across the road at some point and stood with his hat in his hand. When she stood up, he looked at the arm, then at her. "That's my sister's lad," he said. "He'll keep the arm if he doesn't work it. He'll work it. Then tell him not to." She got her bread on credit after that, and half a hundredweight of coal, and Mrs. Tyndall put 4 eggs in the basket and said nothing about them at all. That afternoon she claimed the still room. It was the only room in the house with a stone floor, a water supply of sorts, and shelves. She swept it, scrubbed the sink, cleared the drain with a bent poker, and set her father's scales on the ledge under the window where the light was best. The room began to look like something instead of like the end of something. Nan Ackroyd came up at 4 with a besom over her shoulder, sent by her grandfather and not much pleased about it. She was 15 and had the same habit of turning her head to listen. "He says you're to have this," she said. "He says the hall's had enough of our water without having our brooms as well." "Did he say that, or did you?" Nan considered. "Both." Eliza laid a fire under the copper, because she wanted boiling water for the morning's dressing and the range still would not draw. The kindling caught. The copper began to tick. Nan had gone out to the yard for another armful of laths, and Eliza heard her stop. "Missus." Eliza came to the door, wiping her hands. The girl was standing well back on the gravel, looking up at the roofline of the service range, where no fire had been lit that day at all. "That's your smoke," Nan said. "But that's the wrong end." The smoke was coming out of the north stack, at the far end of the service range, 40 feet from the copper she had just lit. Eliza walked the whole front of the house with the lantern and counted again in the dark. 6 stacks. Then she went back inside and counted hearths, room by room, into the ruined part where the floor was doubtful. Kitchen, servants' hall, 2 bedchambers above, the great parlor grate under the open sky. 5. She sat on the kitchen step a long while with the lantern between her feet. A copper's flue went straight up. Every copper she had ever known went straight up, because a horizontal flue draws badly, and a builder who costs the job by the yard will tell you so for nothing. Somebody had paid to run this one sideways through the thickness of a wall for the length of the house. There was only one reason to do that, and it had nothing to do with boiling water. In the morning she took a knife to the mortar. The 3 shelved walls of the still room were rubble stone bedded in a coarse gray lime that came away in grit. The 4th wall, the cupboard wall, was brick, and the mortar was pale and fine and did not come away at all. Later brick. Better work. Somebody had built a wall inside a wall and had not wanted it to fall down. She measured the room with a cord and a knotted stick, then went out and measured the outside, and stood in the yard doing the sum twice. 2 feet 3 inches unaccounted for, the whole length of the 4th wall. Job Hesketh came up at 8 for his dressing, as he had every morning that week, and found her still standing there. "It's coming clean," she told him, unwinding the linen. "No red past the elbow. You've been sleeping with the arm down." "I've been sleeping." Sleep with it up. He looked past her at the wall. You've been at that plaster. I've been measuring. My father pointed that wall. He said it as though it cost him nothing, and it took her a moment to understand what she had been handed. Or his father. One of them. There's a book at the vestry with the jobs in it, if Tyndall's not burnt it. By Friday, she had a livelihood of sorts, if you could call it that. She dressed the arm, drew a tooth, and made up a bottle of tincture for the schoolmaster's wife. She took 2 shillings and 4pence in coin, and the rest in eggs, buttermilk, and a bag of nails. The money went out faster. Lead for the scullery gutter cost her 11 shillings. Wilf Ackroyd brought a ladder and would not be paid for it, then ate 2 of her 4 eggs, which she decided was payment. The gutter took them a day and a half. When it was done, the passage stopped running with water, and the still room stayed dry through a wet night. Eliza sat in it that evening and wrote the figures in the back of the case book. £3, 2 shillings left. The agent came on the Saturday. He was a soft young man from North Allerton in a good coat, and he stood in the gravel rather than come in, and he had a paper folded in his glove. Mr. Price is prepared to offer £60 for the freehold, he said. Clear of the mortgage. He would take the encumbrance himself. Why? Family feeling. I understand. He hasn't any. The young man smiled thinly. It is a generous offer for a house with no roof, Miss Marsh, and there is talk in the village. About the manner of Mr. Rennick's death. Whose talk? I only repeat what I hear. Then you'll hear this too. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the folded paper out of his glove without asking. I have a casebook with Dr. Fuston's hand at the foot of every week. Tell Mr. Price he is welcome to read it in a courtroom. The agent left. The talk did not. She went down to the vestry on Monday, because Job Hesketh's word had stayed with her, and because £60 was a great deal to offer for a ruin. The rate books were in a chest under the window, damp at the corners and otherwise perfect. She found Harrowgate Hall easily enough. Then she found, in a separate line, rated separately at £4 a year from 1841, a building she had walked past every day for a fortnight without ever seeing. Still House, Harrowgate. The entry ran for 8 years and then was struck through with a single ruled line. Beside it, in the occupiers column, was a name she had never once heard Aldous Rennick say. Miss Hester Rennick. The clerk let her copy the entry for 6pence, and watched her do it, as though the ink were his. Hester Rennick, Eliza said. Who was she? Before my time. It's your book. It's the parish's book, he said, and shut the chest. Betty Ackroyd was 88, and sat by the fire at her son's house with a shawl over her knees in April. She heard the name and her hands stopped moving. Miss Hester, she said. Aye. Tell me. She'd the still house up at the hall. Made up drafts for the fever. The old woman worked her mouth a moment. You went up the back way and knocked at the yard door and she'd have it ready. Never took above 3pence. Took nowt at all from Ruth Metcalf, and Ruth had 6. What was in it? How would I know what was in it? It worked. Nan had come to the doorway with the kettle and stayed there. Where did she go? Eliza said. She didn't go anywhere. She died. Betty Ackroyd turned her face toward the fire. 49. Then they shut the room up and that was the end of it. We've had nowt since but the beck and the doctor at Baydale, and he wants 7 and 6 before he'll take his hat off. Eliza walked back up the avenue in the dark and did not light the lamp for a long time after she got in. She did not break the wall. She had watched her father take apart a fitted drawer once and had never forgotten how badly a thing goes when you are impatient with it. Instead, she emptied the cupboard and looked at it properly by daylight. The 3 sound shelves were pegged. The third was not. It sat in a rebate, and at the back of the rebate, in the shadow where no hand would go by accident, was a hole the width of a pencil. She put her little finger in it, and felt nothing but a smooth turned face of wood, an inch back. Then she went and fetched her father's scales. The beam rod came out of its socket as it always had, 11 inches of brass with a flattened end for truing the pivot. She had carried it from Wakefield to 3 counties, and had never once used it for anything but its own work. It went into the hole to the depth of a knuckle, and stopped against something that turned. The board came away in her hands. Behind it was a dark of a different quality, and the air that came out was dry and warm and smelled of nothing at all, which was the strangest thing about it. Every other room in that house smelled of wet. She had to go in sideways, holding the lantern ahead of her. The chamber ran the whole length of the wall and was 2 feet 3 inches wide. The flue passed behind the brick at knee height, and she could feel the warmth of that morning's copper through it with the back of her hand. Above her, pegged into the joists, were drying racks. 4 tiers of them, slatted, built by somebody who knew that air matters more than heat. The racks were empty. The shelves were empty. There were 41 stoneware jars on them, standing in order, all of them clean, all of them lidded, and every single one bore a paper label with a number and a year, and no name. 1843. No. 19. 1845. She lifted 11 of them before she stopped lifting. Nothing. Swept, wiped, and put back straight. On the bench at the near end lay a glass measure and a nest of brass weights in a fitted box. She turned the smallest weight to the light. 2 letters were scratched into the underside with a needle. H.R. Eliza sat down on the bench with the lantern in her lap and stayed there long enough for the flame to gutter. Somebody had not abandoned this room. Somebody had emptied it, carefully, and left the empties standing in order the way you leave a shop you mean to come back to. At the far end, past the last rack, the chamber ended in a doorway. It had been bricked up. She held the lantern close and saw the courses were laid plumb and neat. And then she saw the dust on the floor at its foot, pale and fine and not yet trodden into the boards. She put her thumbnail against the mortar in the joint. It marked. 22-year-old lime does not mark. She scraped a little into her palm and rubbed it and felt it crumble damp, and she understood that somebody had closed that end of the chamber within the month. The far end of the chamber backed onto the old brewhouse, and the brewhouse had a yard door, and the yard door had been used. Eliza found it that afternoon. The nettles in front of the step were flattened in a broad band. A cart had stood on the cinders long enough to press 2 ruts, and somebody had dropped half a paper of brads by the wall and not troubled to pick them up. She stood in the ruts with her arms folded and worked it out slowly, because getting it wrong would cost her more than getting it late. The jars had been emptied a long time ago. They were clean, lidded, and set in order, and no man in a hurry does that. The wall at the end of them had been laid a few weeks ago by somebody who had come in from the brewhouse, found the racks bare, and closed the way behind him. 2 different hands, 20-odd years apart. Only one of them still walking about. She wrote to Deacon that evening and paid a penny she did not want to spend. His reply came back on the Thursday, and it told her 3 things. That he held no papers of Hester Rennick's. That Aldous had asked him, in 1863, to keep a sealed packet which had since been withdrawn by Aldous himself, and that the half-yearly interest on the mortgage, £9 10 fell due at midsummer. £9 10. She had £3 9. She was still reading the letter when Nan Aykroyd came up the avenue at a run. "It's the Metcalfes," the girl said. "All 3 of them. Since Tuesday, the cottage was the last in the row, and the floor of it was wet clay." Eliza knew what she was looking at before she had her shawl off. 3 children under 9, loose bowels for 4 days, sunken eyes, and the youngest too quiet. "What have they drunk?" "Beck water," said the mother. "Same as everybody." "Boiled?" The woman looked at her. "From now on, boiled. Every drop, and I don't care what it costs in firing." She did what could be done. Salt and sugar and boiled water, a spoonful every quarter hour, hour after hour, and when the mother's hands shook too much, Eliza put the spoon in Nan's and stood over her until she had it. The bedailed druggist wanted £2 8 for what else she needed, and she paid it in coin on the Saturday morning and walked the 11 miles back rather than lose the carrier's fare. That left her 21 shillings. And the roof unmended, and midsummer 6 weeks off. She moved the 2 younger children up to the hall on the Sunday, because their floor was clay and hers was stone and dry, which meant the stillroom. She stood in front of the cupboard for a while with Nan and Job Hesketh in the doorway behind her, and then she took the 3rd shelf out and turned the brass rod and let them see. "Nobody hears of this," she said. "Not your grandfather. Not the fleece." Job put his head in as far as his shoulders and looked a long time at the racks. "That's a drying loft," he said. "It is. My mother had a bunch of something off Miss Hester when she was carrying me. She kept the paper till she died." He straightened up. "I'll say nowt." The youngest Metcalf girl turned the corner on the Tuesday and asked for bread on the Wednesday. On the Thursday, Eliza went up the fell to find the spring. It took her 2 days, and she found it by walking the line of the old pipe trench where the grass grew a different color. The spring head was under a stone hood on her own land, 400 yards above the house, and the cistern below it was choked with a fallen slab and 20 years of leaf. She could not lift the slab. Job could not either, with one arm still weak. Wilf Ackroyd brought 3 men, a bar, and a plank, and none of them asked to be paid. The water came down into the village trough on the Saturday afternoon, brown for the first 10 minutes and then clear. They came out with buckets. Mrs. Tyndall came out with 2, and filled them, and did not thank her, and did not leave either. "It'll silt again," she said. "Then we'll clear it again." "With what?" "I don't know yet," Eliza said. She turned back toward the avenue and stopped. The soft young man from North Allerton was standing at the foot of it in his good coat, with a pocketbook open in his hand. He was not looking at her at all. He was looking at the trough, and at the line of people waiting behind it, and he was writing down how many. Price came himself on the second Tuesday in June, which was the first time he had set foot on the property he had spent 2 months trying to buy. He did not go inside. He stood in the gravel where his agent had stood, and looked up at the roofless gables with something close to satisfaction. "You've been busy," he said. "Water in the village. Very good. There's a piece about it in the North Allerton paper. I didn't put it there." "No." He drew a folded paper from his coat. "But I read it with interest, and so did the gentleman who held my uncle's mortgage. He was glad to be rid of it. £380, and the arrears, and the whole of it now stands in my name." Eliza took the paper and read it through twice while he waited. Notice to redeem. Principal £380. Arrears of interest £38. Payable on or before the 12th day of July. And in default the mortgagee would enter into possession. "You can't have expected anything else," Price said. "You had 6 months of a house you could not keep. That is more than most people get. You offered £60 in April." "I did." "What is it worth now?" "40. He said it pleasantly. "The market has moved." The market found a spring. Something went across his face and was gone. It was the first honest thing she had seen him do. "Miss Marsh, I will say this once, and then I shall stop being civil, because it costs me an afternoon each time. There is nothing in that house. My grandmother stripped it. My uncle mortgaged it, and men have been over it since. Take the £40. "Which men?" "I beg your pardon?" "You said men have been over it." "When?" He put his gloves on. He was very good at not answering, and she watched him be good at it, and she thought, "He does not know that I have been inside." "There is one more thing," he said from the gate. "You will have had the summons by now." "What summons?" "Ah." He looked back at her with what was almost regret. "Then you'll have it Thursday." It came on the Thursday. An information had been laid before the coroner for the district touching the death of Aldous Rennick, gentlemen. An inquest would be held at the Fleece Inn, Ossenthwaite, on Friday the 11th of July. Eliza Marsh, nurse, was required to attend and give evidence. At the Fleece. In the village she had carried water to. 9 days before the mortgage fell due. She read it standing in the kitchen and then went and dressed Job Heskett's arm, because he was at the door and the scar wanted watching, and because her hands would do that whatever else was happening. "Fuston will speak for you," Job said. "Dr. Fuston countersigned every week of it. Then you've naught to fear." "I have a great deal to fear," Eliza said, "but not from the truth, if anyone will let me read it out." She wrote to Fuston that night, and had no answer. She wrote again on the Monday. On the Wednesday she had 4 lines in a clerk's hand, regretting that Dr. Fuston could not correspond upon a matter now before a coroner, and that his papers were in the hands of his attorney. His attorney. In Leeds, where the Halloways lived. The break-in was on the Friday, while she was down at the Metcalfs with the eldest boy's ear. She saw it from the yard. The kitchen door stood open against the wall, and the bar she had fitted herself lay in the nettles with the screws pulled clean out of the frame. They had taken nothing from the kitchen but what was on the table. The casebook had been on the table. She stood over the empty place where it had been and made herself breathe. Then she went down the passage without a candle, because it was still light enough to see, and stopped in the still-room doorway. The cupboard was open. The 3rd shelf lay on the floor in 2 pieces. Beyond it the panel had been forced out of its rebate, and the black mouth of the chamber stood wide. Someone had gone along the shelves in there and knocked 4 of the numbered jars off in their hurry. On the bench, the fitted box was gone. The glass measure was gone. The brass weights, and the smallest weight with HR scratched under it by a woman she had never met, were gone. Eliza knelt down by the rebate and put her finger into the hole where the turn button was. Her father's beam rod was still in it. They had wrenched it sideways and snapped it off at the depth of a knuckle, and the broken brass was bright as a new pin in the last of the light. She did not go to bed. She lit the lantern, swept up the broken stoneware, and set the 4 chip jars back in place, because leaving them on the floor felt like agreeing with him. Nan had come up at dusk and wanted to stay. "Go home," Eliza told her. "Your grandfather will have the constable out." "He'll not." "Go home, Nan." When the girl had gone, she sat on the bench in the chamber, her back against the brick, and looked at the racks. 4 tiers, slatted, pegged into the joists overhead by a person who had understood that air matters more than heat. Her father used to say a drying room has a top and a bottom, and the difference between them is money. Wet stuff low where the air comes in, finished stuff high where it goes out warm. He kept his best on the topmost rack and would not let her put anything up there until she was 20. She had been in this room a dozen times, and had never once held a light above her own head. She stood on the bench, then on the second tier, and lifted the lantern. The top rack ran within 8 inches of the ceiling. Above it the joists showed, and the boards between them were floorboards of the room above, dark with age. All but 3 at the far end, which were newer and shorter, and laid across the joists rather than along them. She got a finger under the middle one. It came up. There was a space above, about 4 feet by 6, floored and lined with lead sheet. The warmth of the flue reached it, and the air in it was as dry as an oven gone cold 3 hours ago. It took an hour to get everything down alone. 2 tin chests, a Japan box, 9 sealed canisters, each with a number and a year in the hand that had labeled the jars, and one later label in Aldous Rennick's writing tied on with string. Seed. Keep dry. So spring. She opened the Japan box last, on the stillroom floor with the lantern beside her, because by then her hands were not steady and she knew it. Inside was a working book, bound in canvas, with HR on the spine in ink. It was a formulary. 62 numbered preparations, each with the plant, the ground, the season of cutting, the drying time, the strength, the dose by age and weight, and under each a list of names. Metcalf, Ackroyd, Tyndall, Kilburn. Beside each name a date, a result, and once, in small letters, no better, and I was wrong to promise. Eliza turned to number 19 and read it 3 times. It was a draft for the summer fever. Its chief ingredient was a bitter growing on wet ground in that parish, cultivated by Hester Rennick in a bed she had walled herself, with the seed saved yearly because the wild stuff was too weak. The second chest held letters: Halloway and Son, manufacturing chemists of Leeds. 3 letters to Miss H. Rennick in 1848 and 1849, offering £40, then £100 for the receipt and the seed. Her copy of the refusal, short and not polite. Then, 6 weeks after her death, a 4th letter to Mr. Aldous Rennick, aged 19, thanking him for his signature and enclosing a draft for £200. And underneath, folded in oilskin, a printed sheet. The specification of Halloway's patent, 1,851, for a fever specific. Eliza had seen the bottles her whole working life. Her father sold them at 1 3p and thought them poor value. She laid the printed sheet beside the canvas book and read the 2 together, line by line. The wording ran near enough the same, which proved nothing on its own. A clever man would say 2 chemists may describe 1 plant alike. Then the quantities. Halloway's specification gave the second ingredient at 2 drachms to the pint. Hester's book gave 2 scruples. Eliza sat back on her heels. 2 scruples is 40 grains. 2 drachms is 120. 3 times the strength. In a draft given to children under 9, and no chemist in England had ever noticed, because the printed sheet had been copied and never compounded. She turned back to the book. There it was, on the page for number 19, in ink of a different color and a different day. The word drachms struck through, the word scruples written above it. A date in the margin. Aprilo opt sute patruzeci shapte. Hester had made that mistake herself, and caught it, and corrected it 2 years before she died. Halloway's patent had copied the line she crossed out. Underneath the oilskin was 1 more paper, in Aldis's hand, dated the November before he died. To whoever opens this, it began. I was 19, and they told me it was only a receipt. Eliza read it to the end. Then she looked at the date on the coroner's summons propped against the copper. 6 days. She spent 4 of the 6 days writing letters and 2 of them walking. The Bedale druggist remembered her. His daybook showed every drug he had sold for the Rennick house between the previous June and April, with dates and quantities in his own hand, and he agreed to bring it. Deacon agreed to come at his own charge, which surprised her. Job Hesketh and Nan Aykroyd would say what they had seen on the 27th of June, and Wilf would say what a paper of Brad's was worth and where he had sold his last. The fleece was packed by 9 on the Friday. They had taken the partition out of the parlor and set the coroner at the round table, with the jury on forms down one side. 14 parish men, Wilf Aykroyd third from the end. Mrs. Halloway sat behind Price in black gloves. The medical evidence took an hour. Aldous Rennick, 61. Disease of the heart and kidneys of long standing. Dr. Fuston's deposition was read by a clerk. He could not, he said, speak to quantities administered in his absence without his countersigned copy, which was in the hands of his attorney. Then let us have it, said the coroner. It is not available, sir. Eliza sat with her hands in her lap and thought, this is what a man looks like when he is being paid to be careful. Price's counsel rose after noon and said he wished to put in extracts from a memorandum book kept by the witness Marsh. Extracts, Eliza said. You will have your turn, said the coroner. I should like the book, sir, not the extracts. There was a pause of the kind that changes a room. The counsel looked at Price. After a moment, Price took a plain quarto out of a case at his feet and set it on the table, and the marbled boards were the boards her father had bought. Would the coroner be good enough to open the cover, Eliza said, and read what is stamped inside it? The coroner opened it. T. Marsh, chemist and druggist, Kirkgate, Wakefield. My father's shop. He died in '64. That book was taken off my kitchen table on the evening of Friday the 27th of June, through a door with its bar torn out. Miss Hesketh and Miss Aykroyd saw the door. Mr. Price's men left a paper of Brad's at my brewhouse. The room made a noise. The coroner put his hand up and it stopped. Miss Marsh, are you charging this gentleman with burglary? I am telling you where the book has been for a fortnight, sir. And I ask that you read the whole of it, since he has not. That is an extraordinary thing to say. He turned 3 pages of it in April, in his uncle's parlor, in front of Mr. Deacon, and put it down again. She looked at Price for the first time. He has never once read to the end of anything written by a servant. Price said nothing. That was the moment she was certain. The coroner read the last week aloud, because the jury asked him to. Then, at her request, he read the totals for 11 months. Mr. Kelsall of Bedale stood up with his daybook and read out what he had supplied over the same period, and the two figures were compared in front of everybody. Kelsall had sold the house 9 ounces of laudanum. The casebook accounted for 8 ounces, 6 dramens, and 30 minims. The remainder, Eliza said, was still in the bottle, which she had brought, sealed, and would leave with the coroner. A dispensing chemist's daughter may be believed or doubted. Arithmetic is arithmetic. The jury was out for 11 minutes. Death from natural causes. Then Eliza asked leave to say why the information had been laid at all. The coroner should have refused her. She had thought about that for 6 days and decided to risk it, and afterward she believed it was the 14 local men on the forms that made him allow it. She put the japanned box on the table and opened it. She read out the 3 offers from Halloway and Son to Miss Hester Rennick, and the refusal. Then the 4th letter, 6 weeks after the funeral, thanking a boy of 19 for his signature and enclosing £200. Then she laid the patent specification beside the canvas book. This is the printed sheet. 2 drams to the pint. This is Miss Rennick's own book. 2 scruples, and the word drams struck out in her hand, and the date beside it, April 1847. She looked up. They copied the line she crossed out. They have been selling it 3 times over strength to children in this parish for 22 years, and Mr. Price's wife's family owns the patent, and my house is the only place on earth where the proof of it was kept. Behind Price, Mrs. Halloway stood up and went out, and the door did not shut properly behind her. Price entered into possession on the 12th of July, or would have if he had not spent that morning at North Allerton answering a summons about a paper of Brad's. His 2 men were committed at the August sessions. One of them said where the brass weights had gone, and where the fitted box had gone, and who had paid for the cart. Price was tried at Michaelmas for receiving, convicted, fined £100 and costs, and did not appeal, because appealing would have meant reading the casebook aloud again. The mortgage was assigned away from him in the 3rd week of July. Halloway and Son took it up themselves, which Deacon said was the act of a firm buying a stick to hold over her. It held over her until February. They did not defend. 2 scruples and 2 drams cannot be argued with in front of a judge who has children of his own. Hester Rennick's canvas book had a date in the margin, and 41 numbered jars stood behind it in a room the parish had rated at £4 a year. The settlement was signed on the 9th of February, 1874. The mortgage was surrendered and cancelled. £1,800 was paid to the estate of Hester Rennick, with a royalty of £120 a year for the remaining term of the patent. The printed sheet was reissued with 2 scruples on it and her name at the head. Eliza read that last clause a great many times. The roof came first, because Job Hesketh said it would, and he was right. They stripped the east wing in April and had it slated by the end of June. He took 11 men off the fell and the quarry road to do it, paid them weekly out of her account, and brought her the book every Saturday whether she asked for it or not. The south range they left. It had no floors and no purpose, and she liked the jackdaws. The conduit was relaid in the autumn of that year, in iron this time, 400 yards from the spring hood to a trough in the village street with 2 taps and a stone surround. It cost her £91. Wilf Ackroyd carted the pipe, and this time she made him take the money. Betty Ackroyd died in the January of 1875, at 90, having been given number 19 twice that winter at the proper strength. "It's the same," she said the first time with her eyes shut. "It's the same as it was. It's her book. I know whose book it is." Eliza sat with her until 4 in the morning and walked home up the avenue in the dark without a lantern, because by then she knew every rut of it. The still room worked. That was the plain fact of it, and it was the one she was proudest of. They cropped the walled bed from Aldous' seed in the second spring, and it came true, which the wild stuff never did. They cut in July, dried on Hester's racks in the warm chamber with the copper going below, and made up in the still room under the window where the light was best. The parish had it at cost. A wholesale house in Leeds took the rest at a price Eliza set herself and did not move from. 6 women worked the beds in season. Nan Ackroyd was apprenticed at 17 and kept the daybook in a hand better than her mistresses, and had opinions about drying times that were usually correct and always expressed. Mrs. Tyndall never once said she had been wrong. She did let the Fleeces' back room be used for the winter surgery and took no rent for it. In 76, a stranger asked her whether it was true about the nurse and the old man. She put down the glass she was polishing and said something that was repeated in the village for years afterward, and never once repeated to Eliza. The brass beam rod was mended in Leeds for 4 shillings. It never truly sat right again. Eliza kept her father's scales on the ledge anyway and used them every working day of her life. The labels came from the printer at Thirsk in the spring of 75. She had argued with him twice about the setting and had got her way. Hester Rennick's Fever Draught, number 19, and beneath it, in smaller type, prepared at Harrowgate, Ossenthwaite, by E. Marsh. On the day the first case came up from Thirsk, Eliza was in the chamber with the lantern hung on its nail. Nan stood on the second tier of the racks with a tray of finished stuff against her shoulder, reaching up. "Top rack," Eliza said. "You're sure? Put it up."